Hi, this is Mashnu, and what I would like to do now is to show you a few positions from a game that was played between two grandmasters and do some exercises. This game comes from a book that I'm reading. It's an excellent book by Boris Gulko entitled Lessons with the Grandmaster. It's actually Grandmaster Boris Gulko shows his own games to an amateur named Joel Sneed, and Mr. Sneed is an amateur rated around 1850, 1900, something like that. So I think that is about the playing strength of many of you around let's say between 1700 and 2000. And in this book they go through the game and they talk about the different positions, and it's very interesting to read what the student thinks about the position and compare it with what Grandmaster Boris Gulko says about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few positions from one game, and then I'm going to ask you to evaluate the position for yourself and answer the question that is asked here in this book. And then after that I'm going to read you what the student thought about the position, and then I'm going to read you what Grandmaster Boris Gulko replies to that. Okay, so well, the first position arises actually after the next move of white, and that is bishop to d2. And in this position perhaps it's a good idea if you pause the video to have a good look at the position. The question that is asked here is how should black play this position? So what do you think that is going on here? What would be a good plan for black? What would be a good move for black? So simply pause the video and think about this question, and then I'm going to start by reading you the answer that the student Mr. Joel Sneed gave to this question. So alright, you had time to think and look at this position, so I'm going to read now from the book. The student Joel says the material is even. White has a strong pawn on e5 which supports a kingside attack because the black king cannot occupy f6. White has nicely posted pieces all aiming at the kingside, and black is behind in development. I would say white has the advantage. If black does nothing, what will white play? I ask this question in order to determine what black needs to defend against. In this position, candidate moves for white are knight to d4, blocking the queen, creating potential threats against e6 and setting up f2, f4. Another candidate is king to h1, preparing f2, f4 by getting out of the pin, and also queen to h4, threatening queen to f6 check. Therefore it makes sense to me for black to play the move g6 to g5 with the idea of knight to g6 and queen to e7. Alright, so that's the answer of the student. So we see that the student is actually thinking in positional ideas. He's evaluating the position first, the material, and what is happening. He is correct in the fact that white is aiming his pieces against the king side. He also notices this weakness on f6 being important. And listen now to the reply of Boris Gulko. The Grandmaster answers, the move g6 to g5 is simply a bad move because it weakens black's kingside too much. For example, and then follows a short variation that I'm going to show you. If g5 is played, then white has queen to g4 followed by h2 h4. Let me draw an arrow here. So this could be a plan for white in this case. And he writes here, white has a weak pawn. I'm sorry, white has a weak pawns but a strong attack, a strong dark square bishop as well. So the real task for black, and I'll go back now to the position where it's all about. It says the real task for black here is to determine which piece should occupy the weak c4 square. Let me highlight it. In my opinion, my opponent solved this problem incorrectly in the game because he decided to bring his knight to c4, after which black's pieces begin to interfere with each other. The correct move would have been bishop to c4 and then develop the knight from e7 from b7 to d6, and then the position would be more or less equal, Gulko says. So it's interesting if we look in the thought process of the student, that he, and perhaps this is something that you recognize, that when you look at certain positions you do see a lot of positional ideas, and you understand where the weaknesses are, and you understand what more or less should be done, but we miss sometimes just these details that make a difference between an amateur and a grandmaster. So in this case we see that the student does understand about this weakness on f6 and the white piece is attacking on the king side, but he misses that his idea of playing g5 is in fact weakening the dark king side position even more and more because of queen to g4 followed by h4. Sorry. Alright, so I'm going to stop here just for a moment and let's go back to the position. There we are. And by the way, the game continued here with the move knight to c6, and as Gulko explained, black wanted to bring this knight to c4 instead of the bishop to c4. And we are going to jump now to another position where again a question is being asked, and at that point, and that is right here, after knight to a5 is going to c4, the question is asked, that's the next exercise, what is the best way to play with white here? It's not an easy question, but again, if you want to practice, pause the video now and have a good look at the position. How should white proceed here? And then I'm going to read again what the student thought, and then I'm going to read Boris Gulko answer. Okay, pause the video. Alright, so we continue now. Now what the student says here, he says black controls the c4 square and intends knight to c4. However, by moving the knight away from the king side, black weakens the control over f5 and g6. Therefore, I would play with white here the move g4. This one. Now Boris Gulko answers, white chances for an advantage are connected to his strong dark square bishop, and if we look at this f6 weakness, we see how important this dark square bishop can be. Also h6 can become a weakness, so this bishop is very important. Gulko is right on that. I'll continue reading now. His first task then is to save the bishop from being exchanged. The black knight, although it will be placed beautifully on c4, will also be a badly placed piece. So it is to white's advantage to lure the knight to c4. If we would have played in this position the move g4, then black can simply reply, and I'm going to show you the variation. So if g4 would have been played, so this is not the correct move to do, then black would reply bishop takes d3, c takes d3, and now the square b3 becomes available for the knight. That means that the rook is attacked, must move, and now knight takes d4. The dark square bishop of white is gone, and now the position is not longer an advantage for white, and even perhaps a bit worse for white because of these weakened pawns now here, especially this pawn on c3 on this half open c file, right? So that means that, and that's, I find this exercise actually quite difficult, I must say, because we really need to understand. The first step is to understand that we need to keep this dark square bishop, and we also need to calculate that there is a way for black to trade it. Actually, black is threatening to trade it by taking on d3 and then going knight to b3. Knight takes d2. In the game, Gulko with white played here the move bishop to e3, and then after knight to c4 he played bishop to c1. So he is preventing the exchange of this bishop. Okay, now again I'm going to move fast forward until we reach the next exercise. Let me see until what move I have to go. Like this, knight to c5, queen to g3, and this is what the next question is about. And the next question is, in the game now, black played knight takes d3. That's what happened in the game. The question that is asked is, what would happen if black would have played knight to a5? So again, you can pause the video and have a look at the position and see if you can find what white would reply if black would play knight to a5. And you see the idea of knight to a5 is again to take on d3 first with the bishop or with the knight, and then go with a knight on to b3, so we can force the trade of this dark square bishop. So what would you do here with white? Pause the video and then I'm going to continue. Alright, so the student answers this question with the following words. He says, after knight to a5 I would play knight to b5, heading to d6. So this is what the student would like to do. And if black plays knight to b7, defending the d6 square, then I would play bishop to a3. We see here actually that the student is thinking in very let's say positional thoughts. The idea that a knight on d6 would be very well placed, so he tries to find a plan according to this positional thoughts. Now listen to Boris Gulko's answer. He says, you missed a tactic. When the combination flows from the logic of the game as part of a planned combination, then we often find the critical moves more easily than if it comes out of the blue. After knight to a5, knight takes e6 check is winning. Now let's have a look at this tactic. So here knight takes e6 check, a fork, king and queen and knight. So here there is no other really good move than to take this knight, and then bishop takes a6. And if here this is taken by the pawn, then it's even worse, because this pawn was necessary to defend g6. So here queen takes g6, loses, well, almost immediately, because after king to f8 there is bishop takes h6, and there is a tremendous attack on the king. So the answer to this question, what if knight to a5, is actually a tactic on this e6 square, and it is based on trading the defender of this bishop on a6. Now I'm going to jump again. Let's return to the game, by the way, because after queen to g3, knight takes d3 was played, and I'm going to move forward again in the game until this moment. So a few moves later, the question in this exercise is, what does white have to do here? This time it's not a very difficult question, but you can pause the video and have a good look at the position and see what would you do here with white. Alright, so the student answers, I would play knight to b5 heading to d6. If black takes on b5, then the a pawn becomes very weak, whereas white's c pawn is defended by the bishop. Alright, so this is the idea of the student, and Boris Gulko answers, your consideration is correct. Because of the threat of penetrating on d6, black has to take the knight, and giving white a better pawn structure. So this time the student answered correctly, knight to b5 is the good move to do, threatening to go to d6 with this knight. Now black has to prevent this, so he takes the knight, and then a takes, b5 followed, and the knight went to a5. And here we have reached again a position where a question is asked, and the question is, which plan does white have to follow, and how does he execute this? This exercise is a bit more difficult, so pause the video again and I'll continue the explanation in a moment. Okay, so the student says here, I missed knight to a5 in my previous analysis. Although the knight is out of play on the edge of the board, it blocks the a file and it threatens knight to b3. I guess I would play here rook to a3, defending b3 and setting up the move c3 to c4. Now Boris Gulko doesn't reply to this, but he shows the next move, and the next move is rook e to b1, like that. So in fact it is similar to the idea of the student, that he wanted to prevent knight to b3, but in a different way. After this move, the student says a great move. It combines prophylactics with attack without because it deprives the knight from going to the b3 square and prepares a rook to b4, when the rook can join in the kingside attack. And Boris Gulko answers, yes, you are correct. White's plan is to attack on the kingside, and to accomplish this goal, White has to transfer his rook from the kingside along to the kingside along the fourth rank. So this is absolutely a brilliant plan, bringing the rook to the b file, and the idea is to move this rook to the kingside to start an attack on the kingside. Now let's move on. Rook to c5 played by black, rook to b4 as planned by white, then queen goes to c7, and now queen to f4 is played. And let me see, let's continue with the game. Queen to e7, h4, so now the kingside attack continues. Rook to c7, queen g3, king h7, queen h3, king to g7, queen f4. A bit strange moves, moving like this. I think perhaps it has to do with the they are close to the time control. But queen to d8 is played now, queen to g4, king to h7, h5. Okay, now we have a breakthrough. White is opening the position. Rook goes to g8. Now white takes on g6, rook takes g6, queen goes to h3, queen to f8, defending h6. And here comes the next question. In this position, the question is, how does white develop his attack? So what would you do here with white? What would be your attacking plan now? Pause the video if you like, and I'm going to read you now first the answer of the student. He says, the problem is that the rook on b4 cannot immediately join in the kingside attack because of knight to b3. Therefore white needs something creative. What about g4? White's pieces are in their best possible positions, so I look for a pawn break. However, the king is exposed now and the g pawn is pinned anyway, so maybe this is simply bad. Now Boris Gulko replies, you're right, g4 is bad, but the main reason it is bad is because it obstructs the activity of the rooks on the fourth rank. So we are talking about a pawn on g4. It obstructs this rook from going to the h file. White has to position his second rook so it can jump to the kingside at the right moment. So in this position, what happened is that white played a very creative move, the move rook a to a4. So both rooks now ready to go to the kingside and join the attack. Queen to g7 played by black, rook to h4. There we go. Now knight to b3, and here again an exercise. You can pause the video and answer the question, what would you do here with white? Okay, the answer that the student gives is, I think black was counting on knight to b3, but it seems to me that white can simply play bishop takes h6, showing the strength of the white rook lift on the previous move. And Grandmaster Gulko replies, you're right. You are right. This also shows that it is easier to find the solution to a problem, a combination, when the tactical blow follows from the logic of the game. Now this is an interesting and important sentence in this explanation by Boris Gulko. It's easier to find the solution to a problem when the tactical blow follows the logic from the logic of the game. So white was already attacking on the king side, placing his heavy pieces against h6. So this is what in practice happens that it makes it easier to find a combination. If we think, okay, how can we exploit this attacking target on h6, and indeed the move that follows in this game is bishop takes h6, and then it continued with rook takes h6, rook takes h6 check, queen takes, and then queen to h4, winning the queen on h6. And well, the game continued a few moves more, but they are not really that interesting, since well, white has simply much more material and has a winning position. I'm going to show you the rest of the game quite fast. Here g4 was played, knight to c5, the queen entered attacking the rook, and now he advances his pawns and the queen goes to c6. This is well, perhaps this is something important to mention, that what white is doing here in fact is simplifying the position in such way that he offers his queen, but it may not be taken, because after that then the c pawn would be unstoppable. If rook takes queen, then b takes c6, and this knight is not on time to stop this pawn from promoting. The game continued with rook to e7 here, and then c4. So white is advancing his pawns, knight to c3, queen to d6, rook b7, queen to a3 attacking the knight goes to e4, f3 chasing the knight away again, and then advancing the pawn even more to c5, threatening to advance and create a pass pawn there. That would be, of course, very dangerous. So black takes here on c5 and white retakes, and now we have a nice passed c pawn. Taking this pawn is tactically wrong because of queen to d3 check, and then we pick up the rook. So in the game, king to g7 was played and white played c6, and here black resigned simply because it's just useless. A move like a rook to c7 is not enough. We can simply play, for example, queen to a5, attacking the rook again, and after the rook moves, the queen simply supports the advance of these pawns, and also perhaps a6 is falling if the queen goes to c8. But well, that's not that interesting. I hope that you found it interesting to compare the way an amateur thinks with the way a grandmaster thinks. That's, I think, the great value of this book, Lessons with a Grandmaster by Boris Gulko, and is similar, by the way, to a book that was written by Jeremy Silman. Jeremy Silman wrote a book called The Amateur's Mind. It's a very interesting experiment where he does this same type of exercise, as he gives a certain position and then he asks different amateurs to talk hard loud about this position. He recorded these words of the amateurs, and then he wrote in a book the different thoughts of these different amateurs of different levels, so then the reader of this book can understand how levels of players of different level think about a chess position, what their thought process is, and this can be very, very instructive. Alright, I'm noticing that this video became quite long. I wasn't aware of that when I started, but well, this is what happens when we get into chess. Time flies, and sometimes we realize that we have been studying chess for a long time, but that's how it goes. Time flies when you're having fun. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next time on YouTube. Bye.